They say family should be the cornerstone of your life, the people who lift you up when you're down. But sometimes, the ones who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. My name is Margaret Reynolds, and at 65 years old, I believed that the lifetime of quiet success I'd built would someday earn me the respect of my son and his wife. I couldn't have been more wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I realized just how little I meant to my son's family wasn't when they stopped inviting me to their children's recitals. It wasn't when they conveniently forgot my birthday 3 years running. It wasn't even when my grandchildren stopped calling because they were too busy with activities. No, it was during last year's Thanksgiving dinner when my daughter-in-law Vanessa looked me straight in the eye and said, "You know, Margaret, sometimes I wonder what use you actually are to this family anymore." The table fell silent. My son, David, stared at his plate, saying nothing. My grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And I sat there, a perfectly roasted turkey growing cold between us, feeling as though I'd been physically struck. After 50 years of making careful investments, after building a fortune that none of them knew about, after secretly paying for Emma's elite summer camp and Tyler's private tennis lessons, when David and Vanessa claimed they couldn't afford it, I was being asked what use I was to the family. The irony might have been funny if it hadn't been so painful. What Vanessa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my modest 2-bedroom home in Maplewood was paid off decades ago. That my seemingly simple lifestyle masked a portfolio worth over $7 million. That the small pension I claimed to live on was actually just the interest from one of my smaller accounts, which I used to maintain the fiction of a retired elementary school teacher living comfortably but frugally. I had never been flashy with money. My late husband, Frank, and I had both grown up poor in rural Pennsylvania, and even after his software company took off in the early 90s, we maintained modest habits. When Frank died 15 years ago, I continued living simply, partly out of habit and partly because I had watched too many of our wealthy friends' children turn entitled and lazy once they realized they'd never have to work. I wanted David to build his own life, to feel the satisfaction of earning his own success. And for many years, he did. He worked his way through college, met Vanessa during his master's program, and landed a good job at a marketing firm. They bought a house in the suburbs of Boston, had 2 beautiful children, and seemed to be living the American dream. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The financial crisis of 2008 hit David's company hard. There were layoffs, salary cuts, increased pressures. He found another position, but at lower pay with longer hours. Vanessa, who had been working part-time as an interior designer, suddenly needed to take on more clients. They began to struggle financially, at least relative to the upper-middle-class lifestyle they had grown accustomed to. That's when I started helping, quietly, indirectly. When they mentioned they couldn't afford to repair their roof, I won a small lottery prize and insisted on gifting them the exact amount needed. When Emma needed braces, I found some savings bonds Frank had left that just covered the orthodontist's bill. I never wanted them to feel like charity cases, but I also couldn't bear to see them struggle when I had the means to help. The problem was, the more I helped, the more they seemed to take it for granted. The gratitude became shorter, the requests more frequent. The emergencies began to include luxury items, a new deck for entertaining, private school tuition because the public schools weren't challenging enough, a second car because sharing was too inconvenient. I drew a line when they asked for help with a down payment on a vacation home in Vermont. "I just don't have that kind of money available," I told David over the phone. "My investments are locked in for retirement." There was a long pause before he responded. "Mom, this is important to us. Vanessa has her heart set on this place. Can't you just, I don't know, Take out a reverse mortgage or something? Something cold settled in my stomach. You want me to borrow against my home so you can buy a second one? It's not like that, he said quickly. We'd pay you back eventually. And anyway, it's not like you need the equity. I'm your only child. The house will come to me someday. Anyway, right? I ended the call shortly after, disturbed by his assumption that my assets were essentially already his. That weekend, I walked through my cozy home, touching the photographs on the wall, the quilt Frank's mother had made for our wedding, the worn leather armchair where I read every evening. This was more than just a future inheritance. It was my life, my security, my home. Still, I tried to maintain our relationship. I drove the 3 hours to their home for Sunday dinners when invited, remembered birthdays and anniversaries with thoughtful gifts, attended school functions for the grandchildren even when I had to sit alone because David and Vanessa were running late. Which brings me to last Thanksgiving, and Vanessa's cutting remark about my usefulness to the family. After dinner, while the others watched football in the living room, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Vanessa. I was quietly washing dishes, something she hadn't offered to help with, when she approached with an empty wine glass. David and I have been talking, she said, refilling her glass with expensive Cabernet. We think it might be time for you to consider a retirement. Community. I placed a clean plate on the drying rack. I'm perfectly happy in my home, Vanessa. She sighed as if my response was frustratingly predictable. That big old house is too much for you to maintain. Plus, it's so far away. If you moved to Sunshine Meadows near us, we could visit more often. They have activities, people your own age. I have friends in Maplewood, I said. My garden club, my book group, my volunteer work at the library. Vanessa took a long sip of wine. Yes, but be realistic, Margaret. You're getting older. What happens when you can't drive anymore? When you need help with daily tasks? It would be so much easier for all of us if you were in a place with support services. What she really meant, I suspected, was that it would be easier if I sold my house, moved into a retirement complex, and presumably made whatever proceeds were left available to them. I'm only 65, Vanessa. I'm in excellent health, and I have no intention of moving. Her expression hardened slightly. Well, that's rather selfish, isn't it? Only thinking about what you want, not what's best for the family as a whole. It took considerable restraint not to point out the irony in her statement. Instead, I simply said, I think I know what's best for me at this stage of my life. That's what you always say, she snapped, her voice rising enough that I worried it might carry to the next room. It's always about what you want, never about helping us. Do you know what it's like for us? Private school tuition, the mortgage, the country club fees we need to maintain for David's business connections? I've helped when I could, I interrupted gently. But I'm on a fixed income now. She let out a sharp laugh. A fixed income. Right. Your generation had it so easy. Affordable houses, stable jobs with pensions. Meanwhile, we're drowning in expenses, and you sit in that paid-off house living the easy life, never offering any real help. I've offered help many times, I reminded her. I've contributed thousands to Emma and Tyler's education, to your home repairs. Pocket change, she dismissed with a wave of her hand. If you really wanted to help, you'd make a significant difference. That house of yours must be worth at least $400,000 in today's market. You don't need all that space. If you sold it, you could help us and still have plenty to live comfortably in a senior apartment. I felt a flush of anger rise to my cheeks. My home is not a piggy bank for you to break open when you want something. Vanessa. And there it is, she said with a bitter smile. When it comes down to it, your stuff matters more to you than your family's well-being. You know what, Margaret? Sometimes I wonder what use you actually are to this family anymore. Those words hung in the air between us, sharp and irretrievable. From the doorway came a small gasp. Emma, my 13-year-old granddaughter, stood frozen, a look of distress on her face. She turned and fled before either of us could speak. "Now look what you've done!" Vanessa hissed, as if the entire scene had been my fault. She stalked out of the kitchen, presumably to find Emma. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stood alone among the half-washed dishes, hands trembling slightly as I gripped the edge of the sink. In that moment, something crystallized within me. A realization that had been forming for years, but that I had resisted facing. The relationship I had with my son and his family was fundamentally broken, warped by unspoken expectations about money and support that had nothing to do with love or respect. On the drive home that night, I made two decisions. First, I would no longer hide my financial situation from David and Vanessa. The fiction of the struggling retired teacher had not protected our relationship as I'd hoped. If anything, it had created a dynamic where they felt entitled to whatever modest resources they thought I had. Second, I would reconsider how my assets would be distributed after my death. For years, I had assumed everything would go to David, and through him, to my grandchildren. Now, I wasn't so sure that would be the wisest or most beneficial choice for anyone involved. The next morning, I called my longtime friend and attorney, Sophia Martinez. "I need to make some changes to my will and trust," I told her. "And I'd like your advice on something else as well." Sophia had known me for 30 years, had helped Frank and me set up our estate plan, and was one of the few people aware of my actual financial situation. "This sounds serious, Marge. Does it have anything to do with that son of yours?" I sighed. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to someone who's known you since our kids were in preschool together," she said warmly. "Come by the office tomorrow. We'll talk through whatever's on your mind." That evening, I sat in Frank's old study, surrounded by the financial records I'd kept meticulously organized since his death. Statements from investment accounts, property deeds, including 2 rental properties in growing neighborhoods that provided steady income, stock certificates, and the paperwork for the charitable foundation we had established in Frank's memory, after he passed. On paper, I was a wealthy woman. In practice, I had been living as if I were just one emergency away from financial hardship. And for what? To avoid spoiling my son? That ship had sailed, though not because of any action of mine. To maintain my independence? That was closer to the truth, but not the whole story. Perhaps I realized I had been afraid. Afraid that if David and Vanessa knew the truth, our relationship would become entirely about money. That I would never know if they valued me or just what I could give them. Now, ironically, I had my answer. Without knowing about my wealth, they still valued me primarily for what I could give them, or what they thought I should give them. The next day, in Sophia's warmly lit office with its view of Maplewood's historic town square, I laid out the Kabi situation. "So, basically," Sophia summarized after listening to my account of Thanksgiving, "your daughter-in-law called you useless because you won't sell your house to fund their lifestyle, and your son sat there and let it happen." Put so bluntly, it sounded even worse. Yes, that's the essence of it. Sophia removed her reading glasses and fixed me with a concerned look. "Marge, I've drafted wills and trusts for hundreds of people over my career. I've seen what money can do to families, both good and bad. What are you really trying to accomplish here?" I considered her question carefully. "I want to be fair to David. Despite everything, he's my son, and I love him. But I also don't want to enable patterns that aren't healthy. For him, for Vanessa, or for my grandchildren." "And you're thinking of disclosing your actual financial situation?" "Yes. The secrecy doesn't seem to be serving any purpose anymore." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "That might be wise. But you should be prepared for various reactions. They might be apologetic when they realize how they've behaved while you were sitting on millions." Or they might feel betrayed that you let them struggle financially when you could have helped more. Or, and this is unfortunately common, they might simply see it as confirmation that they deserve more from you. I've considered all of those possibilities, I admitted. But continuing as we are isn't an option. Something has to change. All right, she said, pulling out a legal pad. Let's talk about specific changes to your estate plan. Over the next 2 hours, we outlined a new approach. Rather than leaving everything outright to David, we would establish a more structured inheritance. A portion would go directly to my grandchildren's education, locked in trusts they couldn't access until college age. Another portion would be earmarked for David, but distributed over time rather than in a lump sum. And significantly, I decided to increase the funding to Frank's foundation, directing it toward causes we had both cared about. Education for first-generation college students, support for small business entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, and arts programs in underserved communities. This is a lot more complex than your current will, Sophia noted as she reviewed our notes. But I think it better reflects your values and concerns. What about the immediate disclosure, though? How do you plan to handle that? I had been giving this considerable thought. I'd like to invite them to dinner at my home. Neutral territory in a sense. I'll explain everything then. Would you like me to be present? Sometimes having a third party, especially one with legal expertise, can help keep these conversations on track. I considered her offer. That might be wise, but let me extend the invitation first and see how they respond. When I returned home that afternoon, I found 3 missed calls from David on my landline and a text message on my rarely used cell. Phone. Mom, call me ASAP. We need to talk about what happened at Thanksgiving. I took a deep breath and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Mom, finally. Look, about Thanksgiving. David, I interrupted gently. I'd like to have you, Vanessa, and the kids over for dinner this Saturday. There are some important things I need to discuss with all of you. There was a pause. Is this about what Vanessa said? Because she was just stressed and had too much wine. You know how she gets. This is about more than just Thanksgiving, I said. Please, this is important to me. Another pause. All right, what time? 5 o'clock. And David? This is a serious family discussion. I'd appreciate it if everyone could be fully present. No phones, no distractions. Sure, Mom, he said, a note of curiosity now evident in his voice. We'll be there. After hanging up, I sat in my garden despite the November chill, thinking about how dramatically things might change in the coming days. The carefully constructed narrative I had maintained for years was about to crumble. Whether what emerged from the ruins would be better or worse remained to be seen. The rest of the week passed in a flurry of preparation, not just for the meal I would serve, but for the conversation that would follow. I gathered financial records, prepared a simple presentation, and consulted again with Sophia, who agreed to arrive after dinner for the disclosure portion of the evening. By Saturday afternoon, everything was ready. I had prepared David's favorite meal from childhood, pot roast with root vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. Simple comfort food that had nothing to do with status or showing off. The dining room table was set with the everyday dishes rather than the fine china that had been my grandmother's. This wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about truth. At precisely 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my hair, took a steadying breath, and went to welcome my family into my home, possibly for the last time as things had been, and the first time as they would become. David stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers. Behind him, Vanessa wore an expression that mixed defiance with forced politeness. Emma and Tyler hung back, clearly sensing the tension. "Mom," David said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You look well." "Thank you for coming," I replied, accepting the flowers with a genuine smile. Despite everything, it was good to see them. "Please, come in. Dinner's almost ready." As they filed past me into the house, I caught Emma's eye. She gave me a small, sad smile that contained more genuine emotion than anything I'd seen from her parents. I squeezed her shoulder gently as she passed. The first part of the evening proceeded with superficial pleasantness. We ate, complimented the food, and engaged in careful conversation about neutral topics: Tyler's science project, Emma's piano recital, the unusually mild fall weather. Vanessa was quieter than usual, but unfailingly polite, as if determined to present a perfect image. After I had served dessert and coffee, I glanced at the clock. Sophia would be arriving soon. It was time. "Before we finish our pie," I said, causing all eyes to turn toward me, "there's something important I need to discuss with you all. Something I should have been more open about years ago." David set down his fork, looking suddenly wary. "Mom, if this is about Thanksgiving again, Vanessa and I have already talked about it. It was a misunderstanding, that's all." "It's about much more than Thanksgiving," I said firmly. "It's about honesty, about family relationships, and yes, about money." Vanessa's posture stiffened noticeably. "What about money?" she asked, her tone carefully controlled. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you about my financial situation," I began. "For years, I've allowed you to believe that I live modestly, because I have to, that I'm getting by on a teacher's pension and small savings." David frowned. "Aren't you?" The doorbell rang, providing a momentary reprieve from their confused stares. "That would be Sophia Martinez," I said, rising. "My attorney. I've asked her to join us for this conversation." "Your attorney?" Vanessa echoed, exchanging an alarmed look with David. "Why would you need an attorney for a family dinner?" "Because what I'm about to share with you has legal implications," I replied simply, and went to let Sophia in. When we returned to the dining room, I could see that David and Vanessa had been whispering urgently to each other. They fell silent as we entered. The children looked bewildered by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "You all know Sophia," I said as she took a seat beside me. "She's been my friend and legal advisor for many years." "Of course," David said, shaking her hand across the table. "But Mom, I'm still not understanding what's going on here." I took a deep breath. "The truth is, I'm not a retired teacher of modest means. Frank and I built substantial wealth through his company and through careful investments over the years. After his death, I continued to grow those investments. Today, my net worth is approximately $7 million. The silence that followed was absolute. David's mouth actually fell open. Vanessa's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in calculation. The children just looked confused. $7 million, David finally managed. "But you never said anything. You let us think." "I let you think I had enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly," I confirmed. "Which is true, technically. I live well below my means by choice." "But why?" Vanessa demanded, anger beginning to replace her shock. "Why would you hide this from us? Do you know what we've been going through financially? The sacrifices we've made? And all this time you were, what? Hoarding money while watching us struggle?" "I've helped substantially over the years," I reminded her gently. "The roof repair, Emma's braces, Tyler's special program last summer. Those weren't small contributions from a pension. They were gifts I could easily afford." "Gifts?" Vanessa repeated incredulously. "Pocket change from your millions doled. Out to make yourself feel generous while we worked ourselves to exhaustion." David placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Vanessa, please." He turned to me, confusion evident on his face. "Mom, I don't understand. Why keep this secret? Didn't you trust us?" That was the question I had been dreading, because the answer was in fact no. I hadn't trusted them, not completely, but saying so would only deepen the rift. When your father died, I began carefully, I had to make decisions about how to handle our wealth. I chose to maintain the modest lifestyle we had always lived, partly because those were my values, and partly because I wanted you to build your own life, David, to feel the satisfaction of earning your own success. So it was a test? David asked, his voice rising slightly. Some kind of character-building exercise at our expense? Not a test, I said firmly. A choice about how to use the resources entrusted to me, and that brings me to why I've asked Sophia to join us tonight. I nodded to her, and she opened her briefcase, removing several documents. Mrs. Reynolds has asked me to explain some changes she's making to her estate plan, Sophia began in her professional tone. Previously, her will left the bulk of her estate directly to you, David. The new plan is more structured. Structured how? David asked, a note of alarm entering his voice. A significant portion will be placed in educational trusts for Emma and Tyler, Sophia explained. Another portion will come to you over time through a series of distributions, rather than all at once. And approximately 30% will go to the Reynolds Foundation, which supports causes that were important to both your parents. Vanessa's face had flushed an angry red. You're cutting David out of his inheritance? After all we've done for you? I met her gaze steadily. I'm not cutting anyone out. I'm ensuring that my estate is used in ways that align with my values, and that truly benefit my family in the long term. This is punishment, she said flatly, for what I said at Thanksgiving. You're punishing us because I hurt your feelings. No, Vanessa, I replied, keeping my voice even with effort. This isn't about punishment. It's about responsibility. About the kind of legacy I want to leave, not just in terms of money, but in terms of values. Tyler, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. I don't understand. Are we rich now, Grandma? His innocent question broke some of the tension. I smiled at him gently. I have resources, Tyler. Whether that makes us rich depends on how you define the word. But more importantly, having money comes with the responsibility to use it wisely. David had been staring at the documents Sophia had placed on the table. Now he looked up at me, hurt evident in his eyes. All these years, Mom. All these years of worry about money, of working overtime, of saying no to the kids because we couldn't afford things. And you had millions just sitting there. The accusation stung, even though I had anticipated it. Not just sitting there, David. Growing, being managed responsibly, being used to help where I saw genuine need. Who gets to decide what's genuine need? He countered. You decided we didn't need help with a down payment on the Vermont house, but that was important to us. You decided what parts of our lives deserved your support and what parts didn't, all while pretending you couldn't afford to help more. There was truth in his words that I couldn't deny. I had made those judgments, had decided where my financial support would go based on my own values and perceptions. You're right, I acknowledged. I made choices about how to use my resources, just as you make choices about how to use yours. Perhaps I should have been more transparent about those choices. Perhaps? Vanessa interjected sarcastically. You've been lying to us for years, manipulating our relationship, making us think you are something you're not. That's not fair, Mom, Emma said suddenly, surprising everyone. She had been so quiet we'd almost forgotten she was there. Grandma has always helped us. Remember when my piano broke and you said we couldn't afford to fix it? Grandma paid for it the next day. Vanessa shot her daughter a warning look. This isn't about individual gifts, Emma. It's about honesty and family loyalty. Is it? I asked quietly. Or is it about expectations and entitlement? About the belief that my resources should automatically be at your disposal? David flinched as if I'd slapped him. Is that what you think of us? That we're just after your money? I think, I said carefully, that money has distorted our relationship in ways we haven't fully acknowledged. Last week at Thanksgiving, Vanessa asked what use I was to this family. The clear implication was that my value is measured by what I provide financially. That's not what I meant, Vanessa protested, though her eyes slid away from mine. I was upset, that's all. Whether you meant it or not, it revealed something important, I continued. It showed me that we need to rebuild our relationship on more solid ground than unspoken financial expectations. Sophia, who had been silent during this exchange, gently intervened. Perhaps it would be helpful to focus on next steps rather than past grievances. Mrs. Reynolds is not disinheriting anyone. She's creating a thoughtful estate plan that provides for her family while also supporting causes she believes in. That's her right. David stood abruptly. I need some air. He walked out of the dining room toward the back porch, letting the screen door slam behind him. Vanessa glared at me, then at Sophia. I think we've heard enough for one evening. Children, get your coats. But Mom, Emma began. Now, Emma, Vanessa snapped. I watched helplessly as my grandchildren reluctantly rose from the table. Tyler came around to give me a quick hug. I don't care about money, Grandma, he whispered. I just like coming to your house. His simple words nearly broke me. I love you, Tyler, I whispered back. That will never change. Emma hugged me next, longer and tighter. I'll call you tomorrow, she promised quietly. After they had gathered their things, Vanessa paused at the front door. You've made your position very clear, Margaret. Now we'll need to consider ours. With that parting shot, she ushered the children out to the car. David remained on the back porch. I found him sitting on the steps, staring out at my garden where the last of the autumn flowers were fading. Your father planted those chrysanthemums, I said softly, sitting down beside him. Every fall, I divide them and replant. That's how they spread so beautifully across the whole border. I remember, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Dad loved this garden. He loved you more, I told him. Everything we built, everything we saved, it was always with you in mind. But not just to give you things, to give you a foundation, values, perspective. David was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what to think, Mom. Part of me is angry that you kept this secret for so long. Another part is embarrassed by how we've acted, especially Vanessa at Thanksgiving. And honestly, part of me is already thinking about what we could do. With some financial help. Pay off the mortgage, upgrade the cars, maybe even that vacation house after all. At least he was being honest. I understand all of those reactions, I said. But I hope you can also understand why I've made the decisions I have, both about how I've lived and about my estate plans. He sighed heavily. I need time to process all this. It's a lot to take in. Of course, I agreed. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He stood up, brushing off his pants. I should get them home. Vanessa is. Well, you saw. I nodded and followed him back through the house. At the front door, he turned to me with a troubled expression. All these years, he said softly. I thought I knew who you were. Now I'm not so sure. I'm still your mother, David, I told him. That hasn't changed. After they left, Sophia helped me clear the half-eaten desserts from the table. That went about as expected, she observed. Yes, I agreed, rinsing plates at the sink. Not great, but not the absolute worst-case scenario either. Give them time, she advised. This is a significant adjustment to their understanding of you and their relationship with you. And if they never adjust, if this is the end of our relationship as it was, Sophia placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Then you build a new relationship. Or you accept that some distances can't be bridged and find meaning elsewhere in your life. But Marge, I've known you a long time. You're not someone who gives up easily, especially on people you love. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by family photographs that suddenly seemed to belong to another era. I picked up one from David's college graduation, his proud smile, my arm around his shoulders, both of us facing the future with optimism. Had I made a mistake in keeping my financial situation secret for so long? Perhaps. Would revealing it sooner have prevented the current rupture? I wasn't sure. What I did know was that the coming days and weeks would reshape my family in ways I couldn't yet predict. The truth was out now, for better or worse. The fortune I had quietly built and protected was no longer secret, no longer mine alone to manage and direct. But as I placed the photograph back on the shelf, I realized something important. My value to my family, to myself, had never really been about the money at all. Whether they could see that yet remained to be seen. The days following my revelation stretched into an uncomfortable silence. I hadn't heard from David or Vanessa since they left my home that Saturday evening. I tried to focus on my usual routines, volunteering at the library on Monday, garden club on Wednesday, book group on Thursday. But my mind kept returning to the shocked expressions on their faces, to David's parting words. I thought I knew who you were. Now I'm not so sure. Had I truly misrepresented myself so completely? I didn't think so. I was still the same Margaret who had taught third grade for 30 years, who baked apple pies from scratch, who kept Frank's favorite sweater hanging in the closet even 15 years after his death. My bank accounts might have contained more zeros than they'd imagined, but they didn't change the essence of who I was. On Friday morning, as I was deadheading the last of my autumn roses, my cell phone rang. It was Emma, calling from school during what must have been her lunch break. Grandma? Her voice sounded small, uncertain. Emma, sweetheart, it's so good to hear from you. Are you okay? Mom and Dad have been arguing a lot and they stop whenever I come into the room, but I know it's about you. My heart ached at the worry in her voice. She was 13, on the cusp of adolescence, still navigating the complex transition from child to young adult. She shouldn't have to carry the weight of adult conflicts. I'm fine, Emma. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, but that doesn't mean anyone needs to worry. They're being stupid, she said with sudden vehemence. Dad keeps saying you lied to us, and Mom keeps talking about how things could be different now, and neither of them is talking about you. Out of the mouths of babes. Emma had pinpointed exactly what bothered me most about the whole situation. The way the money had immediately overshadowed the actual relationship between us. People have complicated feelings about money, I told her gently. It can bring up insecurities and expectations that aren't always rational. Tyler cried last night, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He thinks you won't want to be our grandma anymore because of the fight. Oh, Emma, I said, my own eyes filling with tears. That will never happen. Nothing could ever change how much I love you and Tyler. Will you tell him that for me? And maybe you both could. Come visit this weekend? I could pick you up from school and we could make cookies or work on that puzzle we started last time. Mom probably won't let us, Emma said dejectedly. She's really mad. Well, let me talk to your parents. It's not fair for you and Tyler to be caught in the middle of this. I have to go, she said suddenly. Lunch is almost over. Love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart. Everything will be okay. After we hung up, I sat on my garden bench for a long time, turning the phone over in my hands. The children were suffering, caught in the crossfire of adult resentments and confusion. That, at least, needed to be addressed immediately, whatever else happened with David and Vanessa. I dialed David's number, prepared for the call to go to voicemail, but to my surprise, he answered. "Mom," he said, his tone neutral. "David, I just heard from Emma. She's worried, and apparently Tyler is upset too. They need reassurance that our family issues won't affect my relationship with them." He sighed heavily. "I didn't realize they were so concerned. We've been trying not to discuss it in front of them." "Children are perceptive," I reminded him, falling back on my years of teaching experience. "They pick up on tension even when they don't hear the actual words." "What do you want me to do?" he asked, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "Let me see them," I said simply. "I could pick them up from school today, keep them for a few hours, maybe overnight if that works for you and Vanessa. Give them some normal grandma time without all this hanging over us." There was a long pause. "Vanessa won't like it," he finally said. "She thinks we should present a united front, limit contact until we've figured out how to respond to everything." "And what do you think?" Another pause. "I think my kids miss their grandmother." Hope flickered in my chest. "So I can pick them up?" "Just for the afternoon," he compromised. "I'll tell the school it's okay. But Mom, no discussing any of this with them. No more revelations or changes or anything that might confuse them further." "Of course not," I agreed quickly. "We'll bake cookies and work on our puzzle and pretend everything is completely normal." "Fine. I'll text you when I've called the school." He hesitated, then added, "They get out at 3:15. After hanging up, I hurried inside to prepare for my grandchildren's visit. I gathered baking supplies, made sure the puzzle was accessible on the card table where we'd left it, and found a new book I thought Tyler might enjoy. A gift I'd been saving for Christmas, but that seemed more important to give now. 3 hours. Later, I stood in the school pickup line, waving as Emma and Tyler emerged from the building. Their faces lit up when they spotted me, and they ran to my car, backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. "Grandma!" Tyler launched himself into my arms, his 9-year-old enthusiasm undiminished by recent events. "Dad said we could come to your house." "That's right," I confirmed, hugging him tightly before embracing Emma. "I thought we might bake some cookies and work on our puzzle." Emma's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That sounds nice." In the car, Tyler chattered about his day, a science experiment involving vinegar and baking soda, a kickball game at recess that his team had nearly won, a new comic book series he'd discovered in the school library. Emma was quieter, gazing out the window with the contemplative expression that reminded me so much of David at her age. At home, we fell into familiar routines. Tyler helped me measure ingredients for chocolate chip cookies, taking his role as official taste tester of the raw dough very seriously despite my half-hearted warnings about salmonella. Emma set the table with my everyday dishes, the ones with tiny blue flowers around the rim that she'd always loved. For a little while, it felt almost normal. But as the cookies baked, filling the house with their comforting aroma, Emma finally voiced what had clearly been on her mind. "Grandma, why didn't you tell us you were rich?" I sat down at the kitchen table, gesturing for her to join me. Tyler was absorbed in his new book in the living room, out of earshot if we kept our voices low. "It's complicated, Emma. When your grandfather was alive, we made decisions about how to live and how to handle our money based on our values. After he died, I continued those choices. I never meant to deceive anyone exactly. I just didn't emphasize certain aspects of my financial situation." She considered this, her young brow furrowed in concentration. "But why? Wouldn't it have been easier to just be honest?" "Sometimes the truth creates complications of its own," I tried to explain. "I wanted your dad to build his own life, to feel proud of his own accomplishments. And I worried that if he knew how much money was available, it might change his choices, his motivation." "So you were protecting him?" she asked skeptically. By not telling him the truth? Put that way, it did sound patronizing. I thought I was, I admitted. Now I'm not so sure. The older I get, the more I realize that protecting people from reality isn't always the kindest thing, even when that's the intention. Emma nodded slowly. Mom says you lied because you're selfish and controlling. I winced at her bluntness, but appreciated her honesty. What do you think, Emma? She shrugged, picking at a loose thread on her sweater. I think grown-ups make things way more complicated than they need to be. If you have money and someone needs help, you help them, if you can. But that doesn't mean they get to tell you what to do with your stuff. I smiled at her simple wisdom. That's a pretty good summary of the situation. Are you and Dad going to stop talking to each other? She asked, her voice small again. Like Jasmine's parents after their divorce? No, sweetheart, I assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Your dad and I have had a misunderstanding, but we'll work through it. We've known each other his entire life, after all. That's a bond that doesn't break easily. The timer dinged, signaling that the cookies were done. As I rose to retrieve them from the oven, Emma said one more thing that caught me off guard. I'm glad you have money, Grandma, but I don't care if you give us any of it. I just want you to keep being our grandma. I blinked back tears as I slid the baking sheet onto the cooling rack. That's all I want too, Emma. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. We worked on the 1,000-piece puzzle of the New England coastline that had defeated us during their last visit, making significant progress now that Emma had developed a strategy for sorting the many similar-looking blue pieces of sky and ocean. Tyler read his new book, occasionally sharing particularly exciting passages with us. I prepared a simple dinner of pasta and salad, which we ate at the kitchen table, with more natural conversation than I'd experienced with my family in months. At 7:30, right on schedule, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing on the porch, his expression guardedly neutral. The kids ready? He asked, making no move to enter. They're just gathering their things, I replied, stepping back. Why don't you come in for a minute? There are fresh cookies. He hesitated, then stepped inside, though he remained standing in the entryway. How were they? Wonderful, as always. Emma helped me with a puzzle, and Tyler read most of his new book in one sitting. You've raised good kids, David. A flicker of pride crossed his face. Thanks. There was an awkward pause. I could feel him struggling with whether to maintain the wall of polite distance or engage in a more meaningful conversation. Before he could decide, the children appeared from the living room, backpacks in hand. Dad, Tyler exclaimed. Grandma made cookies, and she gave me this awesome book about kids who find a portal to another dimension in their basement. David smiled at his son's enthusiasm. That sounds great, buddy. Did you thank Grandma? Like 100 times, Tyler assured him. Can we come back tomorrow? David's smile tightened. Not tomorrow. We have plans. He glanced at me apologetically. But maybe next weekend. We'll see. Emma, more perceptive than her brother, gave me a long hug goodbye. It'll be okay, she whispered in my ear. Dad misses you too. He just doesn't know how to say it. After they left, the house felt emptier than usual. I moved through the rooms, tidying up the small messes that came with children's visits. A jacket left on a chair, cookie crumbs on the tablecloth, the half-finished puzzle that now dominated my card table. Each item was a tangible reminder of their presence, small anchors in the uncertain sea I now found myself navigating. The following week brought a tentative text message from David. Kids are asking to visit again. Okay if I drop them off Sat morning? Could pick up Sun afternoon? If that works for you. Progress, of a sort. I replied immediately. That would be wonderful. I'll make up the guest rooms. Having a plan to see my grandchildren again lifted my spirits considerably. I threw myself into preparations, changing sheets, stocking the refrigerator with their favorite foods, pulling out board games from the closet that we hadn't played in ages. I even went to the bookstore to find a new novel for Emma, who had recently developed an interest in mysteries. Saturday morning, I was up early, making French toast batter and setting the table when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find not just Emma and Tyler with their overnight bags, but David as well, looking somewhat uncomfortable but determined. "I thought I might stay for breakfast," he said, his tone suggesting this was a major concession. "If that's all right." "Of course," I said, hiding my surprise. "I was just making French toast. There's plenty for everyone." The children bustled inside, already talking about what they wanted to do during their visit. David followed more, slowly, glancing around the house as if seeing it with new eyes, perhaps mentally calculating its value now that he knew the truth about my finances. In the kitchen, I tried to maintain a natural conversation while preparing breakfast, asking about their week, commenting on the unseasonably warm November weather, keeping things light. David was reserved but polite, helping Tyler set the table without being asked, refilling coffee cups, making an effort. As we ate, Emma brought up her school's upcoming winter concert. "I have a solo in one of the songs," she mentioned casually, though I could see how much it meant to her by the way her eyes darted to gauge our reactions. "That's wonderful," I exclaimed. "When is the concert?" "December 10th, she said. "It's a Thursday night." "I'll be there," I promised, then hesitated, glancing at David to make sure I wasn't overstepping. "If that's all right with your parents, of course." David met my gaze directly for the first time that morning. "Of course it's all right. You're her grandmother." It was a small olive branch, but significant. An acknowledgement that regardless of the tension between us, my role in his children's lives remained important and valid. After breakfast, David surprised me again by offering to help clean up. The children disappeared into the living room to continue the puzzle, leaving us alone in the kitchen with the dishes and the weight of unspoken thoughts. "Mom," he finally said as he dried a plate, "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, about the money and the estate plan and everything." I kept my voice carefully neutral. "And?" He set the dish down carefully. "I was angry. At first? I felt deceived, manipulated even. But this past week, I've been remembering things. How you never pushed me toward a lucrative career, just encouraged me to find meaningful work. How you and Dad lived simply even when his company was doing well. How you taught me to save for what matters and not waste money on status symbols. Those were values we believed in," I said softly. "Money was always a tool for us, not an end in itself." David nodded slowly. "Vanessa doesn't see it that way. For her, money has always been about security, about proving something to the world. And for you?" He sighed, leaning against the counter. "I don't know anymore. When we first got married, when the kids were little, I thought I had it figured out. Work hard, provide for my family, save for the future. But after the financial crisis, after the layoffs and salary cuts, something changed. We started reaching for more, trying to maintain a lifestyle that was slipping away. This was more insight than David had offered in years. I listened, quietly, afraid to break the spell of his unexpected openness. "Vanessa wants me to contest the estate plan," he continued. "She thinks if we hire a lawyer, we can challenge it on the grounds that you misrepresented your financial situation, created false expectations." My stomach tightened. "And what do you think?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Frank that it made my heart ache. "I think that would destroy whatever relationship we have left. And for what? Money that isn't even mine yet, that I've lived without all these years anyway." He looked at me directly. "I won't do it, Mom. Whatever happens between us, I won't fight you in court over your own money." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, David. But," he added, I do think we need to have some honest conversations about the future, about expectations and boundaries and what our family relationship looks like going forward. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Honesty has been in short supply lately, on all sides. A small smile tugged at his lips. Remember when I was 10 and I broke your favorite vase playing indoor baseball? How I tried to glue it back together and pretend nothing had happened? I laughed at the memory. You used an entire tube of Elmer's glue. It was a sticky, misshapen disaster. But you weren't even mad about the vase, he recalled. You were upset that I'd tried to hide it from you instead of just telling the truth. That the vase was just a thing, I reminded him. Your honesty was much more important. David nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's the lesson I forgot somewhere along the way. We finished the dishes in companionable silence, a small bridge rebuilt between us. When he left, promising to return the next day for the children, I felt cautiously hopeful that perhaps our relationship could be salvaged after all. That hope dimmed considerably when my phone rang later that evening. It was Sophia, her tone uncharacteristically serious. Marge, I've just received a very disturbing call from an attorney named Gregory Wilkins. He claims to represent your son and daughter-in-law. My heart sank. David promised me just this morning that he wouldn't contest the estate plan. It's not about the estate plan, Sophia replied grimly. Apparently, your daughter-in-law is exploring the possibility of a legal guardianship proceeding. A what? I couldn't process what she was saying. She's suggesting that you may not be competent to manage your own financial affairs. The attorney was fishing for information about your mental state, your decision-making capacity, whether you've been diagnosed with any cognitive impairments. Shock gave way to anger. That's absurd. I'm perfectly competent. Of course you are, Sophia assured me. I shut him down immediately. But Marge, you need to be prepared. This could get ugly. But why would they? I trailed off as understanding dawned. If they had guardianship over my finances, they could access my money now. They wouldn't have to wait for the estate plan to kick in. Exactly, Sophia confirmed. It's an aggressive and frankly despicable tactic, but not uncommon when large sums of money are involved. David can't possibly be on board with this, I protested, remembering our conversation that morning. He just told me he wouldn't fight. Me in court. The attorney specifically mentioned both of them as clients, Sophia said gently. I'm sorry, Marge. I know how painful this must be. After we hung up, I sat in stunned disbelief. Had David's conciliatory behavior that morning been nothing but a performance designed to lull me into a false sense of security while he and Vanessa plotted behind my back? Or had Vanessa initiated this without his full understanding of what it meant? Either way, the betrayal cut deep. To suggest that I was mentally incompetent, to attempt to seize control of my finances under such a false pretext, it was beyond hurtful. It was predatory. I thought of Emma and Tyler, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware of the toxic dynamics swirling around the adults in their lives. They deserved better than this. We all did. With a heavy heart, I called David's cell, phone. It went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message. David, I've just heard from my attorney about a guardianship proceeding. I need to speak with you immediately. Next, I texted him. This is serious, David. Call me as soon as you get this. I tried to distract myself by reading, but the words swam before my eyes. My mind kept returning to the guardianship threat, to the implications of such an action. If they somehow succeeded, which they wouldn't, but if they did, I would lose all autonomy. My financial decisions, the foundation work I planned, the careful estate structuring I had put in place. All of it could be overridden by whoever was appointed as guardian. The very thought was terrifying. By 11 o'clock, David still hadn't responded. The children were asleep, and I was considering whether to take a sleeping pill myself when the doorbell rang. I approached cautiously, checking through the peephole before opening the door to find David standing there, his expression a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "What is this about a guardianship proceeding?" he demanded without preamble. Stepped back to let him in, keeping my voice low to avoid waking the children. "Your attorney called mine this evening. Apparently, you and Vanessa are exploring having me declared mentally incompetent, so you can take control of my finances." David's face drained of color. "What? No, that's not. I never—" "An attorney named Gregory Wilkins called my lawyer," I said firmly. "He specifically said he represents both you and Vanessa." David sank onto the couch, shaking his head. "No, this is all wrong. Vanessa mentioned talking to a lawyer about our options, but I thought she meant for estate planning advice. Maybe tax implications if you decided to gift us money now instead of later." "Well, according to the attorney who called Sophia, your wife is considering a much more aggressive approach." David looked stricken. "Mom, I swear, I knew nothing about this." "After our conversation this morning, I told Vanessa I wouldn't contest your estate plan, that we needed to respect your wishes and work on rebuilding our relationship. She seemed to accept it, but said she still wanted legal advice about protecting our interests, whatever that meant." I studied his face, searching for signs of deception but finding only genuine distress. "You really didn't know?" "No, God, no. How could you think I would try to have you declared incompetent? That's elder abuse, Mom. It's reprehensible." Relief mingled with lingering concern. I believed him, but that still left Vanessa's actions to deal with. "What are you going to do about it?" He ran his hands over his face. "Fire that lawyer for starters. Make it crystal clear that I want no part of any such proceeding. And then..." He hesitated. "I need to have a very serious conversation with my wife about boundaries and ethics and what kind of example we're setting for our children." "I'm sorry, David," I said gently. "I know this puts you in a difficult position." He gave a hollow laugh. "A difficult position is putting it mildly, caught between my mother and my wife, with my children's well-being hanging in the balance." Moved to sit beside him on the couch. "When your father and I were first married, his parents didn't approve of me. Did you know that?" David looked surprised. "No. You and Grandma Reynolds always seemed so close." "Eventually we were, but at first she thought Frank had married beneath him. I was a public school teacher from a farming family. The Reynolds had been in banking for generations. She expected him to marry someone from their social circle, someone who understood their traditions and values." "What changed?" I smiled at the memory. "Time, partly. But mostly it was your father's unwavering commitment to our marriage. He made it clear to his parents that while he respected them and valued their place in his life, his first loyalty was to me and the family we were building together. Once they understood that, they had to decide whether to accept me or risk losing their son." David absorbed this in silence. Finally, he asked, "Are you saying I should choose between you and Vanessa?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm saying that in a healthy marriage, both partners respect each other's family relationships and don't force each other into impossible choices. Your father didn't have to choose between me and his parents because eventually we all found a way to respect each other's boundaries. And if that's not possible..." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Then you make the best decisions you can for yourself and your children, day by day, with integrity and compassion." I hesitated, then added, "But David, I don't think it's come to that yet. People can surprise us with their capacity for growth and change when given the chance." He nodded slowly. "I should go. It's late and I need to deal with this lawyer situation first thing tomorrow." "The children will be disappointed if you leave now," I pointed out. "They're expecting you tomorrow." David hesitated. "I suppose I could sleep on the couch if you don't mind. The guest room is already made up. I told him. And there are clean towels in the bathroom. As he stood to go upstairs, David paused. For what it's worth, Mom, I really am sorry about all of this. About how we've acted. About taking your support for granted. About not appreciating who you really are beyond what you could give us. I know, I said simply. We'll figure it out, one step at a time. After he disappeared upstairs, I sat, alone in the darkened living room, contemplating the day's dramatic swings from hope to betrayal and back to cautious optimism. Whatever happened next, it was clear that the comfortable illusions we had all been living with, about money, about family loyalty, about our roles in each other's lives, had been permanently shattered. Whether we could build something better, something more authentic from the pieces remained to be seen. But as I finally headed to my own bedroom, I felt a curious sense of liberation. The worst had happened. My financial secret was exposed. My relationship with my son was strained to breaking. My daughter-in-law had attempted a hostile takeover of my resources. And yet, I was still standing, still making my own decisions, still finding moments of genuine connection with the people I loved most. Perhaps that was the real fortune I possessed, not the millions in my investment accounts, but the resilience to weather life's storms with my core values intact. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself holding on to that thought like a talisman against whatever challenges the morning might bring. Morning arrived with the cheerful chaos of children's voices. I woke to the sound of Emma and Tyler giggling. In the kitchen, the clatter of pans and David's gentle admonitions to keep it down. Grandma's still sleeping. For a moment, lying in my bed with sunlight filtering through the curtains, I could almost believe we were a normal family enjoying a weekend together, untouched by revelations and betrayals and legal threats. But reality has a way of asserting itself, no matter how comforting the fantasy. As I dressed and prepared to join my family in the kitchen, I mentally braced for the difficult conversations that surely lay ahead. I found the children attempting to make pancakes under David's supervision. Flour dusted the countertops, eggshells littered the sink, and Tyler was stirring batter with such vigor that tiny droplets spattered his pajama top. The scene was so endearingly domestic that I paused in the doorway, reluctant to interrupt. Emma spotted me first. "Grandma, we're making you breakfast." "I can see that," I replied with a smile, entering the kitchen fully. "What a wonderful surprise." David looked up from where he was heating the griddle. His eyes were shadowed, suggesting he hadn't slept well, but his smile seemed genuine. "The kids insisted, though I think they might be creating more work than they're saving." "The best gifts often do," I said lightly, moving to pour myself a cup of coffee. Breakfast was surprisingly pleasant. The children dominated the conversation with elaborate plans for the day. A nature walk to collect interesting leaves, board games if the weather turned bad, perhaps a movie in the afternoon. David and I exchanged occasional glances over their heads, silently agreeing to postpone our serious discussion until they were occupied elsewhere. That opportunity came mid-morning, when Emma and Tyler settled in the living room with a complicated board game they'd rediscovered in my hall closet. David gestured toward the back porch, and I nodded, grabbing a cardigan to ward off the November chill. We sat side by side on the porch swing that Frank had built decades ago, gently pushing back and forth with our feet. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sounds the creaking of the swing's chains and the distant calls of children playing somewhere down the street. "I called Greg Wilkins first thing this morning," David finally said. "Left a very clear message firing him and stating unequivocally that I want no part of any guardianship proceeding or any other action against you." "Thank you," I said simply. He shook his head. "Don't thank me for not doing something terrible, Mom. That should be the baseline expectation." Still, it couldn't have been an easy call to make. David sighed heavily. "Nothing about this situation is easy. I had a long talk with Vanessa before I came over last night. It was illuminating." I waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. She admitted she'd been exploring the guardianship angle without my knowledge, said she was just gathering information about our options. His mouth twisted bitterly, as if attempting to have my mother declared incompetent was just another financial strategy to consider, like refinancing the mortgage or opening a new IRA. What was her justification? I asked, trying to keep judgment from my voice. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that again reminded me painfully of Frank. She said she was trying to protect our family's interests. That given your history of financial deception, her words, not mine, there was a reasonable case to be made that you weren't making sound decisions. He paused. She also suggested that you might be under the influence of predatory advisors, who were directing your estate planning away from family and toward their own interests. Sophia has been my friend and lawyer for 30 years, I said, unable to keep the indignation from my voice. The idea that she's somehow manipulating me for her own gain is absurd. I know that, David assured me quickly. I told Vanessa the same thing. But Mom, I think you need to understand something about Vanessa's perspective. In her family, money was always used as a form of control. Her father held it over all of them. Her mother, her brothers, Vanessa herself. Financial support came with strings, with expectations, with the ever-present threat of being cut off if you stepped out of line. I frowned, considering this. So she sees my estate planning as a similar form of control? A way to ensure you all behave as I want? Partly, David acknowledged, but it's more complicated than that. When we first married, Vanessa was determined to build a life independent of her family's money and the control that came with it. She was proud, ambitious. What changed? He was quiet for a moment, the swing creaking beneath us. The recession hit hard. My salary was cut, bonuses eliminated. Housing prices dropped just after we'd bought at the peak of the market. Vanessa had to take on more clients for her interior design business, but those dried up too as people cut back on non-essentials. I remember, I said softly. That's when I started helping more directly. David nodded, and we were grateful, truly. But I think for Vanessa, it triggered something from her childhood. That feeling of financial vulnerability, of dependence on someone else's generosity. He glanced at me. Then we adjusted. We started to count on your help, to expect it even. And when you revealed that you'd been, well, not exactly honest about your resources all these years, it felt like another form of control, I finished for him. Like I had been manipulating you by doling out just enough help to keep you dependent, while hiding the true extent of what I could have given. Something like that, he admitted. I'm not saying it's a rational reaction or that it justifies what she's done, but I think I understand it better now. I absorbed this, trying to see the situation through Vanessa's eyes. Her background explained some of her behavior, though it didn't excuse attempting to have me declared incompetent. Still, understanding was a first step toward resolution. Where do we go from here? I asked finally. David sighed. I don't know exactly. Vanessa and I have a lot to work through. This morning, after I called the lawyer, I told her that if she ever does anything like this again, goes behind my back on such a serious matter involving my family, it would fundamentally change our marriage. The gravity of his statement hung in the air between us. I knew better than to pry further, but my heart ached for him, caught between loyalty to his wife and to his mother, trying to navigate a situation for which there was no perfect solution. "And what about you and me?" I asked. "Where do we stand?" He turned to face me fully. "I'm still processing everything, Mom. The revelation about your financial situation, the years of, not lies exactly, but not the whole truth either. The new estate plan." He paused. "But I want us to find a way forward, for myself, for the kids, for our family as a whole." "I want that too," I said softly. Then I think we need to start with complete honesty, he said firmly. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas, no more assumptions about what's best for each other without actually talking about it. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. I agree, though it might take some practice for both of us. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough. From inside the house came the sound of raised voices, Emma and Tyler apparently disagreeing about something in their game. David and I exchanged a glance and simultaneously rose to investigate. Our conversation paused, but not concluded. The rest of the day passed in relative harmony. We took the children on the promised nature walk, collecting colorful leaves and interesting rocks. We played board games when Tyler complained of cold fingers. We made soup for lunch and watched an old movie in the afternoon. All four of us crowded onto the sofa with blankets and popcorn. It felt like the eye of a storm, a pocket of calm surrounded by turbulence on all sides. I knew that when David returned home, he would face difficult conversations with Vanessa. I knew that our own dialogue about honesty and expectations had only just begun. But for these few hours, we were simply family, enjoying each other's company without the weight of recent revelations pressing down on us. As the afternoon light began to fade, David reluctantly announced that it was time to head home. The children protested as they always did at the end of visits, but began gathering their belongings when David remained firm. At the door, Emma hugged me tightly. "Can we come back next weekend?" I looked to David, unwilling to make promises I couldn't keep. He hesitated, then nodded. "We'll work something out." "I'll call you tomorrow," he added quietly to me as the children headed toward the car. "We should continue our conversation." "I'd like that," I replied. After they left, I moved through the quiet house, straightening cushions, gathering stray socks that Tyler had somehow left under the coffee table, and restoring order to the kitchen. The physical activity was soothing, giving my hands something to do while my mind processed the events of the past 24 hours. By evening, I felt restless, unable to settle with a book or television program. On impulse, I called Sophia. "How are you holding up?" she asked immediately upon answering. "Better than expected," I told her, and filled her in on the day's developments. David's rejection of the guardianship idea, our beginning attempts at honest communication, the tentative peace we had established. "That's encouraging," she said, when I finished. "But Marge, I want to make sure you're protecting yourself legally. David's intentions may be good, but Vanessa has shown she's willing to take aggressive action. We should put some additional safeguards in place." "What kind of safeguards?" "For starters, I'd like you to get a complete neuropsychological evaluation. Basically, a thorough assessment of your cognitive functioning. If Vanessa or anyone else tries to question your competence in the future, we'll have independent medical documentation." The suggestion made practical sense, though the idea of having to prove my mental competence was deeply offensive. "Fine. What else?" "We should update your powers of attorney, both for healthcare and financial matters. Make sure you have trusted people in place who can make decisions if you're ever unable to do so yourself." I thought about who I would trust with such responsibility. Sophia, certainly, for the legal aspects. Perhaps my old friend Eleanor, who had been a nurse before retirement, for healthcare decisions. Not David, at least not now, though that realization brought a pang of sadness. "I'll make a list of potential candidates," I promised. "Good. And finally, I think we should consider creating a revocable trust for your assets, with clear provisions about management and distribution. It provides an additional layer of protection against challenges." We discussed the details for another half hour before concluding the call. Sophia promised to start drafting documents on Monday and to arrange for the neuropsychological evaluation with a respected geriatric specialist. After hanging up, I felt a curious mixture of emotions: sadness that such legal fortifications were necessary, anger at being put in this position, but also a certain satisfaction in taking proactive steps to protect myself and my autonomy. As I prepared for bed that night, my thoughts turned to Frank. What would he have made of all this? He had been so proud of David, so certain that our son would grow into a man of integrity and wisdom. Had we made a mistake in keeping our financial situation so private? Would things have been different if we had been more transparent from the beginning? There was no way to know, of course. We had made the choices that seemed right at the time, based on our values and our understanding of our son. If those choices had contributed to the current situation, well, that was something I would need to acknowledge as David and I worked to rebuild our relationship. The next morning, Sunday, dawned gray and rainy. I lingered over coffee and the newspaper, a luxury after the activity-filled day with the grandchildren. Around 11, my phone rang. David, as promised. Our conversation was more structured than the previous days, both of us seemingly aware that we were laying the groundwork for a new kind of relationship. David shared more about his financial concerns, the pressure of private school tuition for both children, the mortgage on a house that was still underwater from the recession, Vanessa's struggling interior design business, his own position at a marketing firm that had never fully recovered from the economic downturn. We're not destitute, he clarified. We can pay our bills. But there's never quite enough left over for the extras, for security, for saving toward college or retirement at the level we should be. I understand, I said, and I did. Financial stress could corrode even the strongest foundations, creating tension and resentment where there might otherwise be partnership and collaboration. But David, why didn't you just talk to me honestly about this? Why the increasing demands, the guilt trips, the attempts to access my equity? He was quiet for a moment. Pride, partly. I wanted to be the kind of son you and Dad could be proud of, successful, self-sufficient. And then when that became harder, I think I started to resent the fact that you seemed to have resources but were choosing not to share them fully. It felt like you were judging our lifestyle choices, our priorities. That wasn't my intention, I said gently. I know that now, he acknowledged. But at the time, it was easier to feel entitled to your help than to confront my own financial mismanagement or to accept that maybe we were living beyond our means. His candor was both surprising and welcome. This was the most open financial discussion we had ever had, and I found myself responding in kind, explaining more about my own financial philosophy, about the deliberate choices Frank and I had made to live simply even when we could have afforded luxury. Your father believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a status symbol, I told him. He saw it as a tool for security, for helping others, for creating opportunities, not for displaying success or acquiring possessions. I remember some of that, David said thoughtfully. The conversations about needs versus wants, about the difference between price and value. Yes, and about the purpose of money, which is not just what it can buy, but what it can build. Security, freedom, legacy. We talked for over an hour, covering ground that should have been explored years earlier. Not all of it was comfortable. David challenged me on what he saw as my controlling approach to financial assistance, and I pushed back on his sense of entitlement to resources he hadn't earned. But the tone remained respectful, the intent clearly to understand rather than to wound. As we were about to hang up, David said, I think we should include Vanessa in our next conversation. I hesitated, uncertain whether I was ready to face the woman who had attempted to have me declared incompetent just days earlier. I know it's asking a lot, David continued when I didn't immediately respond. But she's my wife, the mother of my children. If we're going to rebuild family relationships, she needs to be part of it. Even after what she tried to do, she was wrong, he said firmly. Completely wrong. But if there's any chance of moving forward as a family, we have to at least try to understand each other's perspectives. I admired his commitment to his marriage, his unwillingness to simply side with me against his wife despite her actions. It spoke to a maturity and integrity that gave me hope for our future relationship. "All right," I agreed reluctantly. "But I think we should have that conversation on neutral ground. Not at my house or yours." "That makes sense. There's a coffee shop near our house with a quiet corner in the back. Would that work?" We made tentative plans to meet the following Saturday, giving everyone time to process and prepare. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, thinking about what I wanted from this meeting. What kind of relationship might be possible with Vanessa given everything that had happened? Full reconciliation seemed unlikely, at least in the short term. But perhaps we could establish a civil interaction, a basic respect for boundaries and autonomy that would allow family gatherings without tension, that would protect the children from adult conflicts. Monday morning brought a call from Sophia, with news that she had scheduled my neuropsychological evaluation for Wednesday and had begun drafting the updated powers of attorney. She also suggested I compile comprehensive financial records, not just account statements, but documentation of my decision-making process over the years, evidence of my consistent financial management approach. "If we ever need to demonstrate your competence, it helps to show a pattern of sound financial judgment," she explained. "Your investment strategy has been remarkably consistent and successful for decades. That's powerful evidence of your cognitive abilities." I spent the next 2 days organizing this documentation, a process that proved surprisingly affirming. Laid out chronologically, my financial decisions reflected clear values and priorities: consistent saving, prudent investment, strategic charitable giving, and yes, thoughtful financial assistance to family when appropriate. There was nothing impulsive or erratic that might suggest cognitive decline or vulnerability to influence. Wednesday's evaluation was thorough, but not particularly taxing. Dr. Levinson, a geriatric neuropsychologist with silver hair and kind eyes, put me through a battery of tests assessing everything from memory and attention to judgment and problem-solving abilities. Some were straightforward cognitive tasks, remembering strings of numbers, solving puzzles, identifying patterns. Others involved more complex scenarios requiring decision-making and risk assessment. "You're doing extremely well," she commented at one point as I completed a particularly challenging sequence. "Better than many people 20 years younger." "I've always enjoyed puzzles," I said with a smile. "My husband and I used to do the Sunday crossword together every week." At the end of the 3-hour assessment, Dr. Levinson sat across from me with her notepad. "Mrs. Reynolds, based on my evaluation today, I see absolutely no evidence of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity. Your performance across all domains was consistently strong, often well above average for your age group. I'll prepare a detailed report for your attorney, but I want to assure you that from a neuropsychological perspective, there are no concerns about your ability to manage your affairs or make sound decisions." Her words brought an unexpected wave of emotion, relief, vindication, but also lingering hurt that such validation was necessary at all. "Thank you," I managed to say. "I appreciate your thoroughness." "May I ask," she said gently, "what prompted this evaluation? Most people don't seek this kind of assessment unless there's a specific concern." I briefly explained the situation. With David and Vanessa, the threatened guardianship proceeding, Sophia's recommendation for documentation of my cognitive status. Dr. Levinson nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, I see this more often than I'd like. Family conflicts over financial resources that escalate to questioning an older person's competence. It's particularly common when significant assets are involved." She leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Reynolds, my report will provide strong evidence of your cognitive health. But I want to suggest that you also consider making regular evaluations part of your healthcare routine, perhaps annually. Having a longitudinal record can be valuable if questions ever arise again." It was good advice, though the idea that I might need to regularly prove my competence to protect myself from my own family was deeply sad. "I'll consider that," I promised. After leaving Dr. Levinson's office, I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely liberated. The evaluation had confirmed what I already knew, that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs, making my own decisions, directing my own life. Whatever happened with David and Vanessa, whatever tensions remained to be resolved, I had the capacity and the right to determine my own path forward. As I drove home through the late afternoon traffic, I found myself thinking about the coming weekend's meeting with a new sense of confidence. I was not entering that conversation as a vulnerable elderly woman who could be manipulated or steamrolled, but as a competent adult with clear boundaries and expectations. I hoped David and Vanessa would meet me with similar clarity and respect. But if they didn't, I was prepared to protect myself and my autonomy, whatever that might mean for our future relationship. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the weather itself was trying to ease the tension of the upcoming meeting. I dressed carefully in a sage green pantsuit that Frank had always said brought out the color of my eyes. Not that I was trying to impress Vanessa, but there was something empowering about looking my best in a difficult situation. Sophia had called the previous evening with good news. "Dr. Levinson's report came through today," she'd said. "It's exactly what we wanted. A clear, professional assessment stating that you show no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever and are fully capable of managing your own affairs." "That's a relief," I'd replied, though I'd never doubted the outcome. "I've also completed drafts of the updated powers of attorney and the trust documents," she'd continued. "We can review them next week. In the meantime, how are you feeling about tomorrow's meeting?" I'd considered the question carefully. "Prepared," I'd finally said. "Not optimistic exactly, but ready." Now, as I drove to the coffee shop, where we had agreed to meet, I held on to that feeling of readiness. Whatever happened today, reconciliation, further conflict, or something in between, I was approaching it with clear eyes and firm boundaries. The coffee shop was a charming place, with exposed brick walls and local artwork displayed on every available surface. In the back corner, at a table partially screened by a large ficus plant, I spotted David already seated, checking his watch, nervously. No sign of Vanessa yet. David stood as I approached, greeting me with a quick kiss on the cheek. "Mom, thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied, setting my purse on an empty chair and glancing around. "Vanessa isn't here yet?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "She's running a few minutes late. Client emergency," she said. I simply nodded, not commenting on the convenience of this emergency that allowed Vanessa to make an entrance after David and I were already settled. Some battles weren't worth fighting. "I'll get you a coffee," David offered. "Still take it. With just a splash of cream?" I smiled, touched that he remembered. "Yes, thank you." While David went to order, I assessed our meeting place. The corner table was indeed relatively private, the ambient noise of the cafe providing a buffer that would prevent our conversation from being overheard. The setting felt neutral, yet casual, a good choice for what would undoubtedly be a difficult discussion. David returned with my coffee and a plate of scones. "They had those orange cranberry ones you like," he said, setting everything down. Again, I was surprised by his thoughtfulness, this attention to small details of my preferences that I hadn't realized he'd noticed or remembered. Perhaps there was more foundation to rebuild upon than I'd feared. We chatted about innocuous topics, the unseasonable weather, a local art exhibition he'd attended with the children, my garden club's plans for a spring planting at the community center. It was as if we were both delaying the real conversation until Vanessa arrived, unwilling to start and then have to recap. 10 minutes stretched to 15, then 20. I was just about to suggest that perhaps we should begin without her, when the cafe door opened and Vanessa strode in. She looked immaculate, as always. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater in a flattering shade of blue, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She scanned the room, spotted us, and approached with the confident walk of someone used to commanding attention. "Margaret," she said with a tight smile as she reached our table. "So sorry I'm late. A client had a crisis with some imported tile." "No problem," I replied evenly. "We were just catching up." David stood to pull out a chair for her, a gesture she acknowledged with a brief nod before sitting. "I'll grab you a latte," he said, and headed back to the counter before she could respond. Left alone together, Vanessa and I regarded each other across the table. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I decided to break it. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Vanessa." She adjusted the sleeve of her sweater. David thought it was important. Not exactly a warm opening, but at least she was here. I decided to continue with direct honesty. "I think we need to clear the air after what happened last week." Her eyes flashed. "You mean your revelation that you've been sitting on millions while watching us struggle? Or my exploration of legal options that David apparently finds so objectionable?" Before I could respond, David returned with Vanessa's drink. He must have caught the tail end of her comment because his expression tightened as he set the cup down. "Let's try to keep this civil," he said quietly, reclaiming his seat. "We're here to talk, not to accuse." Vanessa took a sip of her latte, leaving a perfect crescent of lipstick on the rim. "Fine, let's talk. Margaret, why don't you start by explaining why you lied to us for years about your financial situation?" So much for civility. Still, I had prepared for this question. "I didn't lie, Vanessa. I simply didn't volunteer the full extent of my resources. Frank and I always believed in living simply, within our means, regardless of what those means were. After he died, I continued that approach." "Semantics," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "You deliberately created the impression that you were getting by on a modest pension, when in reality, you could have helped us much more substantially." "I did help," I pointed out. "Consistently for years. Whenever you or David mentioned a specific need—" "Crumbs," she interrupted. "Token assistance to maintain your image as the supportive mother while hoarding the bulk of your wealth." David placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Vanessa, we agreed to listen to each other, remember? Mom has a right to manage her own money as she sees fit." She shook off his hand. "Even when that meant watching her son work 60-hour weeks? Even when it meant her grandchildren couldn't participate in opportunities that would have benefited their futures?" "What opportunities are you referring to?" I asked, genuinely curious. I had never refused to help with anything related to the children's education or development. "The Westfield Academy, for one," she said sharply. "The best private elementary school in the state. We had to pull Tyler out after second grade because we couldn't afford the tuition anymore." I frowned, confused. David never mentioned that Tyler was struggling in public school. "He's not struggling," David interjected. "He's doing quite well, actually." Vanessa shot him an irritated look. He could be doing better. The public school has no Latin program, minimal art instruction, and the science curriculum is years behind Westfield's. I took a sip of my coffee, buying time to frame my response carefully. "I've always been willing to support the children's education, Vanessa. But there's a difference between need and preference. Tyler is thriving where he is. Emma is excelling in her public middle school's music program. Would a private school have offered additional advantages? Perhaps. But that doesn't mean their current schools are inadequate." "This is exactly the problem," Vanessa said, leaning forward. "You make these judgments about what's necessary versus what's extravagant based on your own outdated values. The world has changed, Margaret. Success requires advantages, connections, credentials from the right institutions. Success isn't just about external markers," I countered. "It's about developing character, resilience, a solid work ethic. Easy to say when you're sitting on $7 million, she scoffed. David cleared his throat. I think we're getting off track. Mom, Vanessa has a point about the lack of transparency. When we thought you had limited resources, we made certain choices, not asking for help with some expenses, taking on extra work instead of spending more time with the kids. Finding out now that you could have eased those burdens but chose not. 2. It does feel like you were making decisions about our lives without giving us all the information. Put that way, I could see his perspective. I had indeed withheld information that might have influenced their choices, all while believing I was doing the right thing. You're right, I acknowledged. I should have been more transparent. That was a mistake, and I regret it. The simple admission seemed to catch both of them off guard. Perhaps they had expected more defensiveness, more justification. However, I continued after a moment, my financial resources are still mine to manage. I'm not obligated to fund a particular lifestyle or set of choices simply because I can afford to do so. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Even when those choices would benefit your own grandchildren? That depends on the choices, I said calmly. I've never refused to help with anything that directly benefits Emma and Tyler's well-being or development. But there's a difference between supporting their needs and funding a lifestyle that goes beyond what's necessary for their happiness and growth. David shifted uncomfortably. This feels very judgmental, Mom. Who gets to determine what's necessary versus what's excessive? I do, when it's my money being requested, I replied simply. Just as you and Vanessa make those determinations about your own resources. The issue isn't about judgment, it's about boundaries and autonomy. Vanessa made a dismissive sound. Boundaries, autonomy. Such convenient concepts when you're the one holding all the cards. I'm not holding all the cards, I corrected her. You and David have good jobs, a beautiful home, healthy children, and each other. Those are significant assets that have nothing to do with my financial situation. But we could have so much more security, so many more opportunities if you would just… Vanessa, David interrupted, his tone sharp. We've discussed this. Mom is not responsible for funding our lifestyle. She turned to him, incredulous. So you're completely on her side now? After all these years of working ourselves to exhaustion while she sat on a fortune? I'm not on anyone's side, he said with exaggerated patience. I'm trying to find a way forward that respects everyone's position. Speaking of positions, I interjected, deciding it was time to address the elephant in the room. I think we need to discuss the guardianship proceeding that was initiated. Vanessa had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. That was merely an exploratory conversation. With an attorney, nothing was filed with any court. Nevertheless, I continued, it was a serious overstepping of boundaries. You approached a lawyer about having me declared incompetent without any medical or psychological evidence to support such a claim, without discussing it with David, and without any consideration for how such an action would affect our family relationships. I was protecting our interests, she said defensively. Given your pattern of financial secrecy and manipulation… Enough, David cut in, his voice uncharacteristically firm. Vanessa, we've talked about this. There was no justification for that approach, and you know it. Mom has never shown any signs of cognitive impairment or vulnerability to influence, which has now been professionally documented, I added. I've completed a full neuropsychological evaluation that confirms my competence beyond any question. Vanessa's expression flickered with surprise before settling back into careful neutrality. You underwent testing? Yes, on the advice of my attorney, given the guardianship threat. The results are exactly what you'd expect. I'm fully capable of managing my own affairs. A tense silence fell over the table. I sipped my coffee, allowing them time to absorb this information. David looked relieved, as if a weight had been lifted. Vanessa's reaction was harder to read, calculation perhaps, as she reassessed the situation in light of this new development. "Where do we go from here?" David finally asked, looking between us. "I want us to find a way forward as a family. The children miss you, Mom. And despite everything, I miss you too." His words touched me deeply. "I miss you all as well, and I'm willing to work toward rebuilding our relationship, but it has to be based on mutual respect and clear boundaries." "What kind of boundaries?" Vanessa asked, her tone slightly less combative. "For one, no more efforts to control or access my finances through legal means or emotional manipulation," I said firmly. "I'm creating a comprehensive estate plan with my attorney that reflects my values and intentions. That plan includes provisions for David and the children, but it will be structured in ways that I believe are appropriate and beneficial." David nodded. "That seems reasonable. Additionally," I continued, "I'm happy to consider specific requests for assistance with the children's education, healthcare, or significant development opportunities. But these should be presented as requests, not demands, with the understanding that I'll evaluate each one based on its merits and my own judgment." "And if we disagree with your judgment?" Vanessa challenged. "Then you'll need to find alternative solutions, just as any family would when faced with financial limitations. My resources are not an unlimited fund for whatever lifestyle choices you prefer." She pressed her lips together, but didn't argue further. "Progress, perhaps." "I'd also like regular time with the grandchildren," I added, "without tension or underlying conflicts shadowing our interactions. They deserve relationships with all their family members that aren't complicated by adult disagreements." "We can arrange that," David said quickly. "They've already been asking when they can visit again." "What about holidays?" I asked, thinking of the approaching Christmas season. "Will I be welcome, or would my presence be too awkward again?" Vanessa had the decency to look somewhat ashamed at the reference to her Thanksgiving comment. "You're welcome to join us for Christmas," she said with what appeared to be genuine effort. "My parents will be there, but there's room for you too." It wasn't the most enthusiastic invitation, but it was a step forward. "Thank you. I'd like that." The conversation continued for another hour, moving gradually from the tense exchange of grievances to more practical discussions about how to move forward. We established a regular schedule for the grandchildren's visits, alternate weekends and one weekday dinner each month. David proposed a monthly family meeting to discuss any financial requests or concerns openly, rather than letting them fester. Vanessa, while still clearly reluctant to fully concede her position, agreed to these arrangements with minimal resistance. By the time we prepared to leave, the atmosphere had shifted from hostile confrontation to cautious negotiation, not reconciliation, yet not by a long stretch, but the beginning of a potential path toward a new kind of relationship. As we stood outside the cafe about to part ways, Vanessa surprised me by addressing me directly, without David's prompting. "I still think you were wrong to hide your financial situation all these years," she said, her gaze steady. "But I recognize that how I responded was inappropriate. The guardianship inquiry was a mistake. It won't happen again." Coming from Vanessa, this was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I replied. "I hope we can move forward with more honesty on all sides." She nodded once, then turned to David. "I'll meet you at the car. I need to use the restroom first." After she walked back into the cafe, David turned to me with a mix of exhaustion and relief on his face. "That went better than I expected." "Yes," I agreed cautiously, "though I think we have a long way to go." "With Vanessa, always," he said with a wry smile. Then, more seriously, "I meant what I said in there, Mom. I've missed you. This tension between us. It's not what Dad would have wanted." "No, it isn't," I agreed softly. Frank always believed that family was about more than money or obligation. It was about connection, about being truly present for each other. David's eyes grew suspiciously bright. I remember how he used to say that the best inheritance he could leave me wasn't in any bank account. It was in the values and memories we created together. He was right about that, I said, touching his arm gently. And it's not too late for us to honor that legacy, to rebuild what's been damaged. No, it's not too late, he agreed. Then, impulsively, he leaned forward and hugged me. A real embrace, not the perfunctory gesture that had become our norm in recent years. I love you, Mom, despite everything. I love you too, I whispered, holding him tightly. Always have, always will. As I drove home afterward, I felt cautiously optimistic. The meeting had been difficult, as expected, but not disastrous. Boundaries had been established, apologies, of sorts, had been offered, and a tentative framework for moving forward had been created. It wasn't the warm, uncomplicated family relationship I might have wished for, but it was substantive progress from where we had been just a week earlier. At home, I called Sophia to update her on the meeting. Vanessa actually acknowledged that the guardianship inquiry was inappropriate, I told her. She promised it wouldn't happen again. That's significant, Sophia observed, though I still want to complete all the legal safeguards we discussed, just to be certain. Of course, I agreed. Trust, but verify, as they say. After we hung up, I wandered through my quiet house, feeling unusually restless. The day's conversation had stirred up memories and emotions that weren't easily settled. On impulse, I went to the hall closet and pulled out a dusty photo album from the top shelf. Pictures from David's childhood, family vacations, holiday gatherings from decades past. I settled onto the sofa and began turning pages, smiling at images of a gap-toothed David riding his first bicycle, of Frank teaching him to cast a fishing line, of the three of us making silly faces at a beachside photo booth. There we were, a young family with modest means but abundant joy, unaware of the wealth and complications that lay ahead. Had Frank and I made the right choices? Had our desire to raise a son with solid values and a strong work ethic inadvertently created the conditions for the current conflict? Would greater transparency about our financial situation have led to a healthier relationship? Or would it have simply accelerated David's sense of entitlement and Vanessa's materialism? There was no way to know, of course. We had made the best decisions we could with the understanding we had at the time. Now, all I could do was try to correct course, to find a balance between generosity and boundaries, between family support and individual autonomy. As I closed the album, my eye caught a framed quote on my bookshelf, one of Frank's favorites from his dog-eared copy of Thoreau. Wealth is the ability to fully experience life. He had underlined those words deeply, returning to them again and again as a reminder of what truly mattered. Perhaps that was the real legacy I needed to focus on now. Not just the distribution of financial assets, but the cultivation of experiences and relationships that made life rich in the ways that truly counted. The money was important, yes, as a tool for security and opportunity. But it was not the essence of what I wanted to pass on to my son and grandchildren. With that thought in mind, I reached for my phone and sent a text to David. Thinking about a weekend trip to the mountains with you, Vanessa, and the kids when the weather warms up. Maybe that cabin near the lake where we used to go when you were young. Let me know if you might be interested. His response came quickly. I'd like that. I think we all would. Let's talk more about it next week. It wasn't a resolution to all our problems, not by any means. The hurt and mistrust of recent months wouldn't disappear overnight. Vanessa's materialistic values wouldn't suddenly align with mine. My own reluctance to fully trust their motivations wouldn't immediately vanish. But it was a beginning. A small step toward the kind of family relationship that honored Frank's memory and offered hope for the future. For tonight, that would have to be enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.